the burden of proof and asking for evidence. In my freezer here is a stuffed animal. I'm going to tell you that it's a lobster. Now, knowing me, you know that I have stuffed lobsters, but is it in the freezer or not? You could simply believe what I've told you because, well, it's reasonable, but is it true? You couldn't know without looking. So let's find out. Is it a stuffed animal? Well, yes, it's a stuffed animal. No, it wasn't a lobster. Okay. Why did I put them in my mouth? So, I told you partly a true thing, but not the full truth. Now, if we know that I put the stuffed hamster in the freezer, and then I say the stuffed hamster is in the freezer, well, obviously, the stuffed hamster is in the freezer, except it's not in the freezer because I didn't put it in the freezer. I threw it on the ground because I wasn't looking at the freezer when I did this. I just did that, and that was it. So you didn't have enough information to know that I was telling the truth or not. So it's relatively simple to show that something is true. Almost all the time. Now, sometimes it can't be. A statement that's something that has happened that I don't have ready access to prove is something that might be something that you just believe is true because of what is called the social contract. So what is that? The social contract is essentially that we grant each other innocence unless guilt is shown or indicated. So when someone says something, we believe that they're telling us the truth to some degree. We just grant them that statement. It's like, I ate dinner last night. There's probably no way for them to prove this. It's an ordinary claim to make, so why would we bother to ask them to prove it? It doesn't really hurt us to believe it per se. It's a benign belief, so okay, sure, you ate dinner last night, no problem. Of course, then that escalates if they claim something more extraordinary, like that they ate dinner last night with the President of the United States. Well, I want some sort of verification. There'd be something to prove that, right? I mean, where did they go to meet the president? The president came to your house? I mean, there's so many questions to ask about that. And they wouldn't or shouldn't be surprised that you would ask them to prove that that's the case. Because it's more extraordinary than a stuffed animal being inside of a freezer. Although, maybe not as weird. If your friend was in politics and said that they had dinner with the president, then it's not as extraordinary, but it still might be depending on where they are in politics. But maybe they are so high and you know that they've had dinner so many times with the president that it's now a mundane claim. It's like, yeah, stop bragging and showing off already. We know, you know. So it really depends on what the claim is. Hypothetically, there would be some way to prove almost any event occurred. But in many cases, doing so might be ridiculously difficult. How would I prove that I ate dinner last night? Well, if I had thought about it ahead of time and recorded all the food that I currently have and my weight, and then the next day I record all the food I have again and my weight again, that might be some sort of indication to go on. Maybe that wouldn't be enough data though. Maybe we'd have to think harder of all the contributing factors that would have to go in to preparing to show the sort of evidence that would prove that I've eaten dinner last night. Perhaps recording myself eating dinner would be a good start, but I could record that any time and just say that it was yesterday. Is it reasonable to be that skeptical? It depends on the claim. We could maybe one day have some sort of odd society, or we could think of one at any rate and write about it as a pretend story that everybody always has to say things that they can absolutely prove. So everyone's walking around with video cameras constantly recording everything they do so that they can talk about it, because you can't say something that you can't prove or something of that nature. So maybe nobody says I ate dinner because they know that they didn't record it, or they don't want to go through the burden of proving it, so they just they don't say what they did, maybe in that sort of weird society that we could think about. But that's not what we have. If somebody comes up to you on the street and says, "Hey, I love you, man," that's kind of weird, off-putting. Well, what do you mean? Huh? What? Huh? Oh, you're part of that cult that loves everybody cult? Okay, yeah. Oh no, I'm a Christian, I love everyone. Okay, yeah, okay. But you don't really love me, not in that sense that I'm thinking of, but maybe you do. We could test that. We can test chemicals in the brain, and we can also scan the brain and see how the brain responds to different stimuli. And we can gather data from that and make pretty darn accurate predictions about what the person likes and doesn't like, what the person fears and doesn't fear, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm no neurologist by any stretch of the imagination, but with that also added to the playing field, we could know even more perhaps. Now, maybe we don't have all the technology that we want to have to be able to know what a person's thinking per se, but that doesn't mean that we will never have that technology. And to assume or assert that that would be the case is an argument of ignorance. You don't know that we won't one day have that. There's no way to know that. Okay, so where does that leave us with requiring evidence from an individual or a group? Where's the line drawn between an ordinary claim and an extraordinary claim? It's very difficult to decide sometimes, and things where you're not sure, well, maybe it's good to have that as a public discussion. Now here's where that can get odd. You see, skeptics like to doubt things, or maybe they don't like to doubt, but they just do doubt, I don't know. But regardless, when anyone makes a claim, I want some sort of proof of it, unless it's something that I consider pretty normal and ordinary. But if I made a statement and then offer no evidence for it, and in fact say that there is no evidence for it, that's kind of odd. Now, sometimes there might not be evidence for it, and sometimes the statement must just be either believed or not believed. But let's say that the statement is something that could be proven. So we got the hamster, we got the freezer. Am I going to put the hamster in the freezer? Or am I going to pretend to put the hamster in the freezer? No way to know unless I open the freezer. But I could prove it one way or the other simply by opening the freezer. And although I know it, I simply say, well, there's been many documents about this, and people have wrote about it, and the studies are out there, and here's a Wikipedia page about the freezer and the stuffed hamster, and the rest is out there. Go look for it. It's just there's been years of study about this, and it's out there. Google it, and that's really lazy on my part, isn't it? Yeah. And it also hints at something being off a little bit. Something not quite right is going on. It's like, why don't I just show you what's in there? Why can't I just, open the freezer and go, oh, look, there he is. He was in there all the whole time. That's where I put him. Why do I gotta be all, sneaky about it and pretend like the evidence isn't there? I mean, obviously the hamster's no longer in the freezer, but I opened the freezer and there he is again, because that's what I did, but I showed you enough evidence to think that's what I did. By the way, I just put him in there again, or did I? I did. There he is. So, what's my point? The point is that when people push back and say, well, there isn't evidence, even when there is evidence, or you shouldn't ask for evidence about this, that should make us skeptical, and rightfully so, because for almost everything that there is, there's evidence for it. And if there isn't evidence for it, then I think we need to be skeptical about it. Now, I've been accused of scientism by making that sort of statement. And I didn't say that the scientific method is the only way to know things, but evidence is pretty dang good to have, in general. What do we mean by evidence? Well, I take evidence to be empirical evidence. I think that's the most readily accessed evidence. That means you can see it. Not just with your naked eye, but with any sort of technology that can see things beyond the scope of normal human eyesight. Magnetic waves can be seen, electricity can be seen, infrared can be seen, heat and cold can be seen, and so on and so forth. So with the tools of science, we can see things that our naked eye alone could not. Telescopes, microscopes, etc. But we still have something to look at, and you could say, well, like they did when the telescope was first around, the Catholic Church was like, we don't know that the end of the telescope, that's just where he put all those planets there, and it's all a trick, and it takes it apart and it's like, no trick here, see the glass, it's no paintings, no anything, see the whole thing, put it back together, see, looking through it, oh, it's still a trick. Well, now they're being not skeptical because they're believing something absurd that isn't proven. They've just been demonstrated that the telescope is not primed to be false, but they believe something else anyways. There is evidence for things out there, and there's hypothetically a way to get at that evidence, but doing so might be really difficult, or so absurdly difficult that an individual or even a group wouldn't bother to do the effort of doing it. That might be the case, and if it is the case, then just say the evidence is so hard to get that it might as well not be out there. Or maybe it's not out there at all. We don't know. Nobody's gone to the trouble to look for it. But you have to be honest at that point. And going back and forth between, yeah, there's evidence, but there's no evidence. Or, yeah, there's evidence, but you don't have to ask for it or demand it all the time. That should make somebody skeptical, because it sends up some red flags, like something is being sneaky going on. Like, did I put the dang hamster in the freezer or not? At this point, who knows? I mean, I've been going back and forth left and right. Who knows at this point? Oh, no, he's not in there. But he could have been. So, hopefully, this will give you some ideas of why do we ask for evidence in the first place? And the answer is because we doubt things. Why do we doubt things? Well, because we don't want to be taken advantage of in any way, shape, or form. And although you might not be able to presently think of a reason to be skeptical of something that seems rather benign, there might be a good reason to be skeptical of it. It depends on the claim. It absolutely depends on the claim. Eating dinner last night? Okay, yeah, you ate dinner last night. Whatever. Now, maybe I could be skeptical about that, but not announce that to you. But also, I don't have any reason to think that you're lying right now. But I could just be like, okay, I believe that you said that, if that's what you believe, I believe that you believe that. But I don't know if it's true or not. Fair enough, okay. You don't have to. You don't have to believe that. Because I didn't give you proof. But of course, for social interactions, is it okay to just say, yeah, you ate dinner last night? Well, it depends. Do you know the person well, or are they a perfect stranger? If you know them well, then you've established some sort of trust with them and some sort of camaraderie with them, and so you've learned that they typically are honest with you. Still nothing, But if you don't know them, and then, you might be like, I'm a little bit skeptical, a little bit put off, a little bit suspicious, a little bit more guarded. If they're part of some religion or ideology that you oppose, that might even go up further. But you have to be very careful to not be too skeptical, although I don't view it as being too skeptical. I actually view it as going into a conspiracy idea, which actually requires belief. And the amount of beliefs that you have to maintain accelerates upward. So, like I said with the Catholic Church, when they originally had, Galileo's telescope, and said, well, you just, painted the stars or planets inside the telescope or something, that it's some sort of trick, that the mechanism itself is tricking us into seeing what we saw. It's not really doing this, because those things aren't really out there. That requires a belief that it's a trick. It requires a belief that he was willing to go to the time and energy to trick them. It also requires believing that he's putting his life on the line, because I'm sure that he had some suspicion that the church would be against him showing that this is true. So he's willing to do that as well in order to make a big fraud, in order to what? Discredit the church, who's going to, of course, oust him the moment that they have an opportunity to do so? Yeah, all of that. You have to believe all of that is true in order to think that this is what's done. And what's worse, you don't have evidence that shows that he did in fact do any of those things. So it's pure belief. So it's not like hyper-skepticism is a thing, as far as I can tell. It's more like you start to have to believe things in order to prove the idea that you're already thinking is true. Like, I know what your motive is. You have no idea what somebody's motive is. You can't hope to know their motive. You can guess, and you might guess correctly, but you won't know their motive. And even if they told you their motive, they could be lying. So there's no way to know for sure. And that's where we have this skepticism step in and say, okay, what can I doubt without having to believe stuff that I don't want to believe, or that I'm worried about? My stance has been typically to require the person making the claim to present empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument. And if they won't do that, then I have to be skeptical. Period. End of story. That's it. And on certain subjects, I've noticed that just makes people even more determined to tell me to go look for it or that it's out there, and to provide really bad sources of proof that's not even worth calling proof. You know, a Wikipedia page is just not good enough. If you're asking for science, then it should be a scientifically peer-reviewed paper. It would be like the best thing that you could offer somebody, but it would also have to be something not behind a paywall so that they can actually read it. Now, maybe you think they won't understand it, but at least you've done your due diligence. You haven't just told them to believe that there's a hamster in the freezer without proving that there is a hamster in the freezer. Unless he wasn't in there, but he was, but I can't prove that at this point. So, burden of proof, evidence, these things have to be carefully considered and weighed. And it's not just, well, it's up to you. If you really care about this topic, then you'll go look for it. So everything I've been saying about this burden of proof and everything, I've been using a very simple example. There's a hamster in my freezer that's stuffed, or there isn't. And remember the statement I made at the very beginning of this video, that there was a stuffed lobster in the freezer, but there wasn't one. You all remember that. How many times did I go back and forth opening and closing the freezer? What if I made a very clever edit and somehow and magically there are lobsters that are stuffed in the freezer? Because you can make edits, and there's a hamster and there's another lobster, because you never know what somebody might do to trick you. Why? Because they can. So, unless and until we have empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument like lobsters exist, although that's not really an argument, we should be skeptical of the conclusions. Alright, it's time to check on my lobster. I think he should be pretty cold about now. There he is. Okay, he's doing pretty good. He's pretty cold. Let's go ahead and switch him to hamster here and put that in the freezer. And wait a minute, did I put him in there the right way? No, I didn't. I put the lobster. Let's take him out and put the hamster in there. There we go. Okay, let's you know what? I don't know. Maybe I did that wrong. Let me check again. Okay, so nope, they're gone. They're both gone. Where did they? Okay, let me close it. Think about it for a moment here. Okay, no, it's a hamster. Let's put the lobster in there. Let's make him look happy. Let's do that. Let's put him back in there. Okay, wait a minute. What if nope, let's just put them both in there this time for sure. Okay, now if I open it, then they're gone. Yep, that's what I expected to happen.